This lesson is about cells and life. As you take a look at the photo, you can see two things living in that picture. One, the iguana, and the other one is the plant. Go ahead and take a look at this question or this information right here. Two of a kind. At first glance, the plant and animal in the photo might seem like they have nothing in common whatsoever. And when you do look at the picture, you think we're talking two separate things. The plant is rooted in the ground and the iguana can move quickly around wherever it would like to go. But the questions that I have for you are the same as the ones that are listed there. Are they more alike than they appear? And how can you find this out? The questions that are listed right here, I want you to stop the video and write the information down in your science journal and answer them. I want this question here, this one here, and this one here answered to the best of your knowledge from what you know already. The first question, in what ways are plants and animals different? That would be this one here. The second one, in what fundamental way are plants and animals the same? Are there ways that they are the same? And the third one that's right here, do the similarities between plants and animals outweigh the differences or vice versa? This is more of your opinion, but it is information that I want you to provide to me in your science journal. So go ahead and take a look at the picture, look at the questions, and use your prior knowledge to answer that information. Now again, go ahead and stop this recording, write those questions down in your science journal, and answer them. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is, I want you to know the vocabulary. So these words you're going to be writing down, and later on when you see the vocabulary words with their definition, you're going to write their definition beside these. Leave plenty of space so that you can have the vocabulary and their definition together. We're talking this time about cell theory, macromolecule, nucleic acid, protein, lipid, and carbohydrates. The last thing I want you to know about for this piece of information is the key concept questions. So these questions you're going to be writing down, and we're going to make sure that by the end of this lesson you know how to answer them. The first key concept question is, how did scientists' understanding of cells develop? The second key concept question that we're going to need to answer by the end of this lesson is, what basic substances make up a cell? Okay, so remember that at this point you can stop the video. You can rewatch it if you didn't understand something or you would like to get more information. But stopping the video and writing the questions and your answers down that you need to answer is key to this. I will go on with the next information, but please make sure you have your vocabulary written down in your science journal, and also write the vocabulary definitions as soon as you see them in the video.
Understanding cells. Have you ever looked up at the night sky and tried to find other planets in our solar system? It is hard to see them without using a telescope. This is because the other planets are millions of kilometers away. Just like we can use telescopes to see other planets, we can use microscopes to see the basic units of all living things, cells. But people didn't always know about cells. Because cells are so small, early scientists had no tools to study them. It took hundreds of years for scientists to learn about cells. More than 300 years ago, an English scientist named Robert Hooke built a microscope. He used the microscope to look at cork, which is part of a cork oak tree's bark. What he saw looked like the openings in a honeycomb, as shown in Figure 1. The openings reminded him of the small rooms called cells, where monks lived. He called the structures cells, from the Latin word cellula, which means small rooms.
Okay, now I would like for you to pause your video and I want you to write down some questions. One of the questions we will answer when we do a lab in class in reference to seeds and cells, and that is this first question. Please write this question down. Why was it necessary to use a magnifying lens to look at the bean seed? Write that question down. We will answer that one in class. The other one I want you to write down and answer this time is, why were early scientists unaware that cells existed? Okay. The last one I want you to write down and answer would be this one here. This one right here. What do you think you'd find if you cut open the bean seed? That one will also be one we answer in class in reference to our lab that we're going to be having. Okay, so as I said, make sure you've paused your video and you've pulled that information out and you've put it on in your science journal. Okay? All right, moving right along.
The cell theory. After Hooke's discovery, other scientists began making better microscopes and looking for cells in many other places, such as pond water and blood. The newer microscopes enabled scientists to see different structures inside cells. Matthias Schleiden, a German scientist, used one of the new microscopes to look at plant cells. Around the same time, another German scientist, Theodor Schwann, used a microscope to study animal cells. Schleiden and Schwann realized that plant and animal cells have similar features. You'll read about many of these features in Lesson 2. Almost 2 decades later, Rudolf Virchow, a German doctor, proposed that all cells come from pre-existing cells, or cells that already exist. The observations made by Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow were combined into one theory. As illustrated in Table 1, the cell theory states that all living things are made up of one or more cells. The cell is the smallest unit of life, and all new cells come from pre-existing cells. After the development of the cell theory, scientists raised more questions about cells. If all living things are made of cells, what are cells made of?
Okay, so looking at the diagram, we have principles on this side, 1, 2, 3, and examples on this side, okay? Cell theory has 3 principles to it. The first one is that all living things are made of one or more cells. The diagram or the example shows a leaf, and its cells are formed like this, okay? The second part or the second principle in the cell theory is the cell is the smallest unit of life. This part we've talked about already. It was actually in your vocabulary, which was cell, and unicellular, meaning single cell, was part of your vocabulary from last lesson. Okay, so we're using our prior knowledge of cells and coming up with this information, saying that the cell is the smallest unit of life, which you know. The example is this amoeba. The single cell, unicellular amoeba, is surrounding this alga right here to get food and energy. So it's taking in food and energy. The last principle in this cell theory is all new cells come from pre-existing cells. The example, you have an existing cell that moves on and it divides and comes up with a new cell. The old cell, the new cell. So the theory was all new cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, so let's quickly take a look at this diagram here, and we're going to concentrate mostly on this. The leaf cells. Each one of these little things is a cell. Okay? If you take a look at it, all of them are individual, each one of these. But they're pushed so close together that they form our flower or our leaves of the flower. All right? So what you need to look at is, I don't think you maybe understand as much about how individual cells, which is what all of these are form tissues, or a tissue, which would be like our skin cells, and in this case, like the leaf cells put together to form a leaf. Okay? If you take a look at these, you see very, very little space, if none, and mostly none, space. No space between those cells. They're so compacted together, so pushed together, that they form no space whatsoever. Okay, you'll find about 28 cells in that photo right there. Okay. Would tissues hold together if there were gaps between them? So if there were gaps between these cells, would they hold together to form a tissue? The answer to this is no. Tightly bound cells give the cell strength and shape. So when they form something, it's a group of cells that have formed to give us what we see. Okay, next thing I want you to do is, I'm going to make this small, and I'm going to make this large, because now you're writing down your questions, and you're answering them from what we've talked about. Okay? Let's do this first one here. Where do new cells come from? Where do new cells come from? Remember, after you see this, you can pause it, write your questions down and answer them, and restart it again so that you pick up where you left off. But all of this needs to be in your science journal, please. Second question, if you notice, the big key is one that we have to know, or it's one of the questions we're going to be answering by the end. And that is, how did scientists' understanding of cells develop? How did they develop their understanding of cells? The third one, could the cell theory have been developed before the invention of a microscope? Okay, so those three questions, this one, and this one, need to be written down in your science journal. Okay, and it needs to have answers to the best of your knowledge from the information that I provided to you. Okay, moving right along. So here's what we're going to do. Oops. I'm going to make that small, and I'm going to make this larger, because what we're looking at right there is your first definition, cell theory. Okay, you need to stop this and write down your definition with your vocabulary word, because you know you will be tested over this information. The cell theory states that all living things are made of one or more cells. The cell is the smallest unit of life, and all new cells come from pre-existing cells. That's a definition for cell theory. Please make sure you're writing that information down, because it is quite important.
Basic cell substances. Have you ever watched a train travel down a railroad track? The locomotive pulls train cars that are hooked together. Like a train, many of the substances in cells are made of smaller parts that are joined together. These substances, called macromolecules, form by joining many small molecules together. As you will read later in this lesson, macromolecules have many important roles in cells. But macromolecules cannot function without one of the most important substances in cells, water.
Okay, so what I want you to do now is to write a definition. We're looking at this one right here. Macromolecules. This definition right here. Part of your vocabulary. These substances, called macromolecules, form by joining small molecules together. So go ahead, if you need to, pause the video, and then write your definition and start it up again so that you can get the rest of this information. But that is one piece of information that you're going to need. Okay, making it smaller and moving right along. Cells contain many macromolecules, or large molecules composed of a large number of smaller molecules joined together. What I want you to do now is, I want you to write some questions down. That would be this one here. In what ways Are the macromolecules in cells similar to long trains or brick walls? The other one I would like for you to write down would be this one. Why do cells need water to function? Both of those questions need to be answered by you at this time. So again, go ahead and pause this. And then once you're done writing your questions and answers in your science journal, go ahead and start it back up and we'll continue with the lesson.
The main ingredient, water. The main ingredient in any cell is water. It makes up more than 70% of a cell's volume and is essential for life. Why is water such an important molecule? In addition to making up a large part of the inside of cells, water also surrounds cells. The water surrounding your cells helps to insulate your body, which maintains homeostasis, or a stable internal environment. The structure of a water molecule makes it ideal for dissolving many other substances. Substances must be in a liquid to move into and out of cells. A water molecule has two areas. An area that is more negative, called the negative end, this end can attract the positive part of another substance. An area that is more positive, called the positive end, this end can attract the negative part of another substance. Examine figure 2 to see how the positive and negative ends of water molecules dissolve salt crystals.
Okay, so let's take a look at the example that's here. Hold on just a second. Need to make some things smaller so we can make a couple of things a little larger. Okay, let's take a look at this. The diagram that was provided shows sodium chloride, which is salt. You'll notice positives and negatives. Your negative green would be chloride, and the little positive blue right there happens to be the sodium. The combination of the two makes salt. If you take this salt and you drop it in the water, which of course water is hydrogen and oxygen, you'll notice the oxygen is indicated by the red with the negative sign, and the hydrogen is the little bitty blue with the positive sign. So if you dump your salt into the water, you'll know that water actually has the salt dissolve. What truly happens is that these two elements here, they separate, and you get sodium, sorry, wrong one, my mistake. You get a sodium molecule with a chloride molecule, and they're separated, unlike this picture where they were together. Sodium chloride is held together by ionic bonds. When dissolved in water, sodium chloride separates into positive sodium ions and negative chloride ions. Ions, of course, are atoms that have gained or lost one or more electron and acquire an electric charge. Okay, let's talk about the water molecule. In the reading, it stated that negative end can attract a positive part of another molecule or another substance, and that a positive end can attract the negative part to another substance. So knowing that a negative tracks a positive and a positive tracks a negative, if I were to give you this question, which part of the salt crystal is attracted to the oxygen in the water molecule, knowing that the chloride is a negative and that the oxygen is a negative, the hydrogen is a positive, and the sodium is a positive, which part of the sodium chloride or the salt crystal would be attracted to the water oxygen molecule? Think about that. When you go to class, I'm going to ask that specific question, and I want to see if you understood this information, that a positive attracts a negative and a negative attracts a positive. Okay, so I want to close this down. I want to close this down. And I want to bring up questions that you're going to be writing down right now. Okay, that's this one. What function does water play in your body? Question number 2 is this one. Which part of the salt crystal is attracted to the oxygen in the water crystal or water molecule? That's the one I just asked you. The third one I want you to write down is why do scientists think that Mars and some of the moons of the solar system may contain some form of life? That would be this one here. I want you to write all 3 of those down. I want you to answer them to the best of your ability. This one here is probably more of a, okay, I think this is what had happened, or I think this is why, and that's what you're going to write down. Okay, this is not a right or wrong. This is more like, let's see if I understand what we're talking about. Okay, so those 3 questions, this one, and this one, need to be written down in your science journal. Go ahead and pause this at this point and do that. Okay, and then we'll move on to the next information. I do want you to make sure that you know that water makes up most of a cell's volume, and it is an ideal liquid for dissolving many substances. Okay, many substances. So make sure you know it. Water makes up most of the cell's volume, and it's ideal for dissolving many substances. Okay, so I'm quickly going to make some things smaller and some things larger, since we're going to be talking about some of this information now. These can be moved around, moving down, making a bit larger so you can see it, and we're going to go from there.
Macromolecules. Although water is essential for life, all cells contain other substances that enable them to function. Recall that macromolecules are large molecules that form when smaller molecules join together. As shown in Figure 3, there are 4 types of macromolecules in cells: nucleic acids, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Each type of macromolecule has unique functions in a cell. These functions range from growth and communication to movement and storage.
Okay, so now we want to talk about the 4, this one, this one, this one, and this one, macromolecules, and their functions in a cell. You're looking at the cell right here. We're going to be talking about nucleic acids. They hold the genetic information for the cell. You notice this right here would be the nucleus, and in the nucleus, the nucleic acids hold genetic information. It holds the information that makes a cell the cell, how it functions. The next one would be lipids. The lipids, their function is energy storage. It also has the function of the protective membrane, which is around the nucleus, and communication. Okay? Carbohydrates inside the cell. The function for carbohydrates is energy storage. Also, it provides structural support, and it also helps communication. The last one would be proteins. Proteins, its functions, which are more than one, helps with communication. It helps transport material. It also chemically breaks down substances inside the cell itself, in here. And the last one is it gives structural support. So again, proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, and carbohydrates are all things that we're going to be talking about. Okay, so now I'm going to be shrinking this information a little bit. Okay. And wanting you to please, again, start to write questions and answer them. What are 4 kinds of macromolecules? I just mentioned those if you didn't already get that. And the second question, this question and this question, which of the 4 kinds of macromolecules has a precise function and location inside of the cell in this figure? Okay, so I will shrink this. Remember, you can pause this, write your questions and your answers, and then start it again. This question and this question again, just like I asked. And then start it again so that you can figure out the answers. Okay? So those were the two questions. And that was the information that I asked you to provide to me.
Nucleic acids. Both deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid are nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are macromolecules that form when long chains of molecules called nucleotides join together. The order of nucleotides in DNA and RNA is important. If you change the order of words in a sentence, you can change the meaning of the sentence. In a similar way, changing the order of nucleotides in DNA and RNA can change the genetic information in a cell. Nucleic acids are important in cells because they contain genetic information. This information can pass from parents to offspring. DNA includes instructions for cell growth, cell reproduction, and cell processes that enable a cell to respond to its environment. DNA is used to make RNA. RNA is used to make proteins.
Okay, so you need to remember that there are two types of nucleic acids. One is DNA, and the other one is RNA. Okay, so at this time it's time to write down another definition. Hold on just a second. Let's give us some room here to bring up our definition of nucleic acid. Okay, right here. Nucleic acids are macromolecules that form when long chains of molecules called nucleotides join together. Please make sure you have that definition because this information is going to be on the quiz, vocab quiz coming up, and I want you to do very well. I want to see you succeed. So write that information down, and then I want you to write these things down too. So hold on just a second. Again, you can pause information and start it back up again so that you're not missing out. The next one I want you to do, as I move things around, what does DNA make and what does RNA make? That's this question here. I want you to write that question, answer it to the best of your ability. The second question I want you to write down in your science journal is, if the order of nucleotides in a section of DNA gets mixed up when new DNA is made, what is the end result? This one here, this question. The last question I want you to answer would be this one here. Since DNA contains all the instructions for cells to grow, divide, and respond to the environment, why does an organism need proteins? That's this question here. So go ahead, write those three things down, answer to the best of your ability if possible, and then we will move along.
Proteins. The macromolecules necessary for nearly everything cells do are proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acid molecules. You just read that RNA is used to make proteins. RNA contains instructions for joining amino acids together. Cells contain hundreds of proteins. Each protein has a unique function. Some proteins help cells communicate with each other. Other proteins transport substances around inside cells. Some proteins, such as amylase in saliva, help break down nutrients in food. Other proteins, such as keratin, a protein found in hair, horns, and feathers, provide structural support. Lipids. Another group of macromolecules found in cells is lipids. A lipid is a large macromolecule that does not dissolve in water. Because lipids do not mix with water, they play an important role as protective barriers in cells. They are also the major part of cell membranes. Lipids play roles in energy storage and in cell communication. Examples of lipids are cholesterol, phospholipids, and vitamin A. Reading check. Why are lipids important to cells? Carbohydrates. One sugar molecule, two sugar molecules, or a long chain of sugar molecules make up carbohydrates. Carbohydrates store energy, provide structural support, and are needed for communication between cells. Sugars and starches are carbohydrates that store energy. Fruits contain sugars. Breads and pastas are mostly starch. The energy in sugars and starches can be released quickly through chemical reactions in cells. Cellulose is a carbohydrate in the cell walls in plants that provides structural support. Key concept check. What basic substances make up a cell?
Okay, so now you've had some of the reading. I'm going to make sure you have all the vocabulary. So I'm closing this down. Okay, and bringing out some of the vocabulary that you haven't yet seen. Proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acid molecules. Please write that down in your vocab. Make sure you have it so that we can quiz you over it and get you a good grade. The next one is lipids. Make that a little larger. A lipid is a large macromolecule that does not dissolve in water. Remember we talked about dissolving in water, the salt crystals in the past there? Now we're talking about something that does not dissolve in water. Okay, that would be a lipid. All right. And the last one that I want you to write down would be this one right here. Carbohydrate. One sugar molecule, two sugar molecules, or a long chain of sugar molecules make up carbohydrates. Okay, go ahead and write all of that down. Pause it if you need to. Write the information in your science journal and then restart it again. There is another question that I would like, or another small group of questions that I have for you. All right, so I'm going to make these smaller. Working through our information. Okay. 3 questions. Make sure you're writing them also in your science journal so we can talk about them in class. How are proteins manufactured in a cell? That would be this question here. The next one, if you notice, the key concept check. What basic substances make up a cell? This one is important for us because it is one of those essential questions that we talked about at the very beginning of us needing to know. The last one is a check of the information that we've talked about. Why are lipids important to cells? Just kind of seeing whether or not you're listening to the information that's being provided to you. Okay, so those 3 questions, okay, need to be written down in your science journal, and we actually should be able to answer the key concepts at this point. Okay, as we move on from here, you should have all the information needed to answer all of the questions. So we're going to stop the lesson at this point. We're going to move on with the next page, and I want you to make sure that you are doing all of the questions. You are going to write your question and answer this time. Write your question and the answer this time in your science journal, and we can check them in class. Okay, so the next information you have, of course, you're going to pause the page and you're going to write your questions and then you're going to answer them. And that is the lesson review, which is on the next slide. Again, please make sure that you are writing your question and your answers for each one of these questions. Make sure that you are drawing, okay, the organizer, please. With this one, all you have to do is write your answer. You do not have to write the question. Okay? So this one you're doing the drawing. This one all you're doing is answering the question. Everything else on this page right here, you are going to be writing your question and your answer, please. Writing the question and the answer. Thanks. And I hope you learned a lot in this lesson.